Welcome to another episode of Ripple Therapy Podcast. I am your host, Katie.
I am your other host, Michelle. Welcome.
And we're going to take a break from our guests, even though they're so amazing this week, because, introducing sort of the guest platform, I think has taken our podcast in new directions, which we're super excited about. And it's really important to us, I think, I'll speak for you as well, Michelle, but important to both of us to really create a platform for people with different opinions, different perspectives, different voices to be able to speak up and be heard. And so sort of, part of why we embarked upon this podcast in the first place was to create this type of community, right? And in the truly Gestalt and relational sense, create opportunities for contact, human contact. Do you agree with that now that I've spoken for you?
I love it. Yes, it sounds great and right to me. Yes, aligned with them.
Okay, amazing, awesome. But we're talking off camera about some of the questions that have come up for us as we sit with these different people and hear from them about their different perspectives and stories and opinions, and in some case, politics and whatever else. I think it's a really interesting opportunity to see and discuss the connections between, platforming guests as podcast hosts and the way we show up as therapists in our individual sessions with clients. The expectation, I think, in both cases is that we will show up both judgmental and unbiased.
I think you said judgmental.
Did I? Oh, wow. Freudian slip. Maybe I'll cut that. Or maybe I'll just be honest. What I meant to say was non-judgmental and unbiased. Oh, that's interesting. Anyway, you know what? And in a true Gestalt sense, I'm going to interrogate why I slipped up and said judgmental. And, I think it's because it can be a challenge, right? It doesn't seem useful or honest to say, oh, well, I'm never judgmental. I mean, I'm a human being. Of course I'm judgmental. And I think that for all of us, and I talk to clients about this sometimes, some of our judgments just pop into our heads and we don't choose them necessarily. And I would argue that, we're responsible for our actions, not our thoughts. But at the same time, if I'm sitting with somebody who is espousing beliefs, let's say, that I don't agree with, I do, if I'm being honest, have judgments around, how do I handle that as a therapist? Yeah. How do you handle that as a therapist?
Well, I like what you're saying, and I think it is important to note that it is actually a stance that we work on to be non-judgmental, right?
Right.
That is actually part of the training of holding space for another human being, is to be able to be yeah, I know what my opinions are on this, but they actually don't matter that much right now, right? And I can remain open and allow the other person's reality to kind of be held by me in a way where I'm not saying you're bad for this or you're wrong for that. You know what I mean? It's no, what does this actually mean to you? Remaining curious and open. And it is something you work at as a therapist. It's not it just happens, And I think, like you said, it's something that you consciously do. And how do you bring that into real life?
Yeah, I mean, what came up for me as you were talking was that being non-judgmental, either as a therapist or if you do that in your real life, it's a choice. We are choosing to show up non-judgmentally. And I do think that's important. And I do think it's an interesting perspective that I am more or less successful at in my real life. To be fair, I think I'm very good at it in my therapist life. I'm thanks to the training and the practice and commitment and all the rest of it. But it's not always as easy in my personal life.
Well, the stakes are different, right? I don't think it makes sense to pretend that they aren't, right? It's as a therapist, the boundaries of it support us as well as the client, right? Knowing it's a certain amount of time, certain frequency, a certain agreed upon kind of contract between you and the client. It's it keeps everybody kind of safe in that environment. And then when you're out in your own life, it's that's why you're not supposed to do therapy with people in your life, because the stakes are different, right? And your investment is different. And so it's hard to remain not judgmental when it feels like something very important is at stake.
Yeah. And the other thing that you mentioned is that all of this in terms of the safety in the therapeutic alliance, the relationship that is created between therapist and client, right? is predicated on a series of agreements. And they're explicit agreements, right? Like, this is what we are agreeing to. This is exactly what's happening between us. And I would argue that that's much harder to achieve, or it just doesn't happen often out in the world, right? That's not possible. So often you're walking into situations, or we all walk into situations where we have a particular understanding of what's happening, and the other person across the way has a completely different understanding of what's happening, and it makes it harder, right? But
Totally.
I was thinking about some of these, like, all the guests that we've had so far have been amazing. We have some more very, very exciting guests coming up. So like and subscribe. I always forget, so I put it in now. Great. Okay, there we go.
Nice.
That was nice. That was an organic mention, right? These amazing guests that we've had on, and more to follow. How do we do it? Do you want to take a stab at maybe explaining for the people how we are able to create a non-judgmental space? Because there are a series of agreements, but we're not doing therapy, obviously.
No.
Right? Like, there are agreements about coming on the podcast and what we're doing, and we have a conversation about it beforehand so people understand, hopefully, sort of what they're getting into, but it's not a therapeutic experience.
But we're coming at it from a point of genuine curiosity and openness. And I think that there is some desire in there, in the sense of like wanting other perspectives, like wanting other people's kind of worlds to impact ours. And to me, the only way I kind of know how to do that authentically is to give that person kind of space to speak about what they want, and to show up how they want, and then kind of respond from there. And I feel like when we do that, like, there's like spontaneous things that happen, right? And that's the lovely thing about getting to know somebody else, like, with curiosity. And I think that's the best friends making, is kind of predicated on that, like a genuine kind of interest and curiosity. So I think it's like being willing to kind of like go into somebody else's world and invite them into ours, right? But it's sort of like, speak about your world within our container.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of things that come up for me, two words. One is generosity. There's a particular sort of generosity, I think, on both sides, right? Like, there's a generosity that they're exhibiting by showing up and giving us their time and attention and everything else. But then we extend a generosity, to your point, of space and being able to walk with them. This is getting really therapist-y, but like, walk with them down the path that they want to go, right? Without friction or resistance. And so if I take it back to, therapy sessions, sometimes I end up walking with people in directions that I would not really choose to go personally. But again, it's therapy. It's not about me. It's actually about them. And so if I can keep that generosity present, but then also the curiosity, to me, that is the absolute, that's like the greatest tool that we have, I would argue, both as therapists and just as people in the world. Because, if someone comes in and they start talking to me about something that I find doesn't align with my own personal values, let's say, which is fine, the best way I have found to stay with them is to just like continue to be curious, really curious. So I don't get bogged down in the content necessarily of what they're saying. It's much more about, like, that's so interesting. What does that mean to you? Like, where does that come from? What is the value that this person is assigning to that belief? How did they learn it? And it lets me stay in contact with them, and it lets me stay with them. And then that friction is not problematic. Yeah?
Yes. What I was going to say is, like, the curiosity is actually kind of where we do bring ourselves in, right? Allows that contact to happen. So it's like, there's the one thing to like offer space for someone, right? But then we're meeting them with genuine curiosity, right? And that's kind of what allows us to like walk with them for a little bit. Yeah, like you said, actually make that contact, because that's another thing that I feel like was so valuable to learn in therapy school. I'm like, is that even the right term? I don't know.
Therapy school? I love it. I think it's perfect.
To find what you are genuinely curious about, like, not to fake that, right? Like,
no, it has to
and not to judge that about yourself. Like, even though the client might be leaning somewhere else, it's like, oh, but that's kind of not what I'm interested in right now, right? And so it's like, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't necessarily go where the client wants to go, but it's sort of like this sense of like, that's how I'm bringing myself into the room. And so that's how we're bringing ourselves to meet the guests, is in that space of genuine curiosity.
Well, I think, although it maybe takes a bit of practice, so, back to therapy school a little bit, I think that, like, I have yet to meet a client with whom I could not access some genuine curiosity. Even when I started out, I wasn't as good at determining my ideal client. I wasn't as good at choosing my demographic. I think that's true for a lot of new therapists. We sort of take anyone. Oh my God, we need clients. It's great. And so if I'm thinking back, if I'm honest, I did have some clients that I found challenging, more challenging than other people. It was harder for me to stay with them for various reasons. And I don't work with those demographics anymore for obvious reasons, right? But even when I think back to maybe dynamics that I found challenging, there was never a time that I couldn't access some kind of curiosity about this person. And as I'm saying this to you out loud right now, it's sort of a reminder to me as a human being living in this very troubled world currently that maybe I need to do a little bit more of that out in the world. When I'm annoyed by someone, or I'm annoyed by someone's seeming lack of generosity, or someone's unkindness or rudeness or whatever, maybe it's sort of a daily practice, or it could be a daily practice to kind of step back and go, okay, let's access that curiosity. It's not that it's not annoying, it's still annoying, but it really kind of helps me access my compassion.
Yeah. Well, like you said, that generosity of spirit to be like,
Yeah.
what, like maybe their perspective is different. They're responding that way for a reason.
Clearly.
And oftentimes it's like we write them off saying like, oh, that person's just a jerk or whatever, right? And it's like, no, they have their own reasons for acting the way that they are acting. And so being able to kind of extend that grace to people, especially when you don't want to, like, especially when you want to like dig into that feeling of like annoyance or anger or whatever it is, to actually be like, no, actually I'm gonna look at this person as a little more than one dimensional, right? Like that they have different facets and they're showing up in a way that is irritating to me right now. And I'm not denying my truth about it, but it doesn't mean I have to write that person off either.
No, it's true. And I had a session recently where I was talking to somebody who's with whom we're sort of exploring this client's anger and how to express the anger and what to do with this corrosive anger that they feel and all that kind of stuff. I think there's something to be said for choosing compassion when you can, choosing that curiosity, or using curiosity as a way to hook into your compassion is actually better for us as well. So on one hand, yes, ideally you operate differently in the world. That's fine. So that has an impact on the other person. But I think of times where I've behaved badly, right? Where I've let my anger and irritation, I'm thinking like road ragey kind of stuff, but whatever. Like I've let
Oh my God, I was totally thinking about cars and driving. Yes.
So cars, driving, or, like on the phone with like a service person who's just stonewalling and I lose my mind. I think about some of my worst behavior, which is more just being really short, being impatient. I'm annoyed with the other person. And so in that moment, I let it out at the other person, onto the other person, whatever, right? But I think there's also like a backlash onto me, because I think about those times and I get off the phone and it takes me a long time to shake it. You know what I mean? And so I think in a way it's a little bit selfish, but if I'm nicer to people in the world, I think it benefits me as well. Like not necessarily from a karmic perspective, although perhaps that as well, but from an energetic perspective, like from an energetic resource perspective. Because if I walk away from an exchange, even if I'm in the right, but I've been kind of a dick about it, whatever, I feel bad. I feel bad about myself,
Yeah. I think you're kind of speaking about that like unsupported anger or frustration that we can get into in like daily life, like you said, where it's actually out of contact. So it's like it's not that anger is not useful or that you can never express it to anybody. It's just like you're kind of like throwing it out and then being like bye, right? Like you're not actually hanging in for the impact. Like there's no kind of stakes in the relationship. And I totally agree, like that it is energetically not great for you, like that backlash.
Like
yeah, because I guess I can't stop thinking about like driving or like road rage, right? And so it's like even though it might feel good in that moment to be like, oh, like irritated someone because they like clearly did something wrong and to me or whatever, right? That kind of righteousness we can get. The feeling that sticks with me is icky. Like I don't like it. I don't like it in my body. It doesn't feel useful. It's like it just like you said, it feels corrosive. And so unsupported anger, I think, is kind of what I'm talking about.
And you said it a minute ago as well, and I just want to reinforce when you're out of contact. So if I'm screaming into the wind because I'm annoyed by whatever, like I'm not in contact, I'm not hanging in for the impact. It's a lot easier to be an asshole, frankly, if you're not in contact with some other person, right? Like I could yell at you through my screen if I don't like a comment that you've, whatever, right? Like all that stuff. It's so easy to do that. And then I'm riled up and I'm angry and I'm, whatever. It's a lot harder to do that if I'm sitting across a table with you and we are legitimately disagreeing about something, which is fine, right? But if I'm able to sit across the table, and I think it's important, these podcasts that we're doing, but also as therapists as well, contact is not about agreement necessarily, right? Often contact is actually about being able to hang in when you don't agree, right? Or that you're coming at it from a totally different perspective, or you have an idea that I don't really agree with, or whatever. I don't see it the same way. But if we're able to hang in together, human to human, it's a lot harder to hate you,
Mm-hmm.
like it's a lot harder to dismiss you. And I think you said at one point to like distill you down to some one-dimensional enemy or whatever, if I'm
Yep.
able to stay in contact. And we may never agree on anything, that's fine, but we can do that as humans, and it's a different depth of connection.
It feels invaluable. And it's like when you're not in contact with the other person, you get thrown out of contact with yourself.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly. That's where the
and
corrosiveness comes in, I think.
totally.
Right.
And that kind of almost like flighty, ungrounded sensation that you can get from that. And then it can often take a long time to like enter your body almost and reground and be like, I'm okay, it's okay. Like this way you have to then deal with almost like the consequences of allowing that to escalate out of contact. And
Yes.
sorry, you seem itchy to say something.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. That wasn't my intention, but I 1,000% agree with what you're saying. And it's making me think of my own personal struggle we've talked about before about, I want to be a global citizen and pay attention to what's happening in the world. I think that I need to at least be a witness, if not a participant in trying to shift the needle and make things better and heal things and whatever, right? So to do that, I have to be aware of what's happening. But then if I spend too much time on my screens scrolling, the news or whatever else, I start to, you've described it so perfectly. I think what's happening is I'm falling out of contact with myself, right? Because there's no potential for contact. If I'm just watching something on a screen, I cannot be in contact with the person talking or whatever is happening. And too much of that, and I start to lose balance,
Mm-hmm. Yes,
right?
because I think like you're speaking to that real human desire to be in contact with each other, to like be
Yeah.
seen, be known, be met, be cared about, and not dismissed, right? Like to be able to
Mhm.
be seen in your totality, to show up
Yeah.
in your totality and be able to accept somebody else that way. I think like that's the whole game of being human.
Well,
Uh,
I think it is. And I think that that's how, we talk. So I have a cat literally bouncing off the
oh,
walls. I don't know what she's doing. She's running up and down the stairs, and like
being
the other cats is
yourself.
watching. She's being herself, in contact with herself. It's amazing. No, but I mean, I talk to clients about this all the time, and it's true for me personally as well. If we spend too much time on social media, looking at the news, being aware of what's happening, it starts to impact our mental health. And it's just become really clear in this conversation with you right now that I think that's why. Because the more time, like I can watch a show, right? And it doesn't impact my mental health the same way, right? Because I'm just being entertained, but it's not the same experience. Trying to engage with the world and some of the, frankly, the horrors that are happening in the world right now just pushes me further and further out of contact. And that's when my mental health starts to suffer, right? And so we can look at that through a screen. But I think, there's all this science now about how we are more isolated and lonely as human beings than theoretically has ever existed before. And I think that if I am lonely and disconnected from my neighbors, that's also being out of contact. So more than anything, I think what we need and what we're yearning for, it doesn't solve everything, but one of the things to really focus on is this, community creation,
Mhm.
and not just communities of like-minded people. That's nice, that's easy, but like we're trying to do on this podcast, communities of people who come from different places with different experiences, different perspectives, and the richness and the, like, the word I want is balm, right? BALM, like the balm of it all. Right? Like it's soothing, it's like soothing to our psychic soul. I'm just going off the rails,
Yeah.
but
I love it.
but you get what I mean, right? It's
Yeah.
like in a more earthly way, like we're thirsty, we're hungry for it, I think. And it's the contact, it's not agreement, it's not friendship necessarily, although that's lovely. It's connection, right? Even if it means that, wow, you think that, I don't agree. All right, well, tell me more. Like, let's
Yeah.
talk about that, right? We
Yeah.
shake hands and agree to disagree, whatever.
Yeah, it's like, even if I get uncomfortable, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's like this kind of myriad of emotions that can come with that, right? And sort of being
Yes.
open to hanging in with that and not being like alarmed by it or be like, oh, this means we don't agree. Yeah, like to kind of shut things down. It's sort of like to remain open to what comes up for you as stuff is coming up for the other person, making space for both. And so, yeah, I think you said that very beautifully in terms of like wanting to create that community with our guests and with our podcast.
Mhm.
And even just what we're putting out into the world, right? The wanting to have that sense of a different kind of purpose offering, right? That's a little bit like softer, it's a little bit more open, it's a little more curious, right? Like to be able to
Yeah.
offer at this time feels really meaningful.
Yeah, and I do believe, I said this before, this is my hot take for April 20th, 2026. I think that generally speaking, more and more of us are losing our appetite for divisiveness, for division. It's exhausting. It's whatever the opposite of nutritious is. Do you know what I mean? It's
Painful,
like
depleting.
depleting. Yeah, it's like eating fast food. I don't know, right? Like it's not sustaining. So yeah, the opposite of sustaining. But it's a drain. I think it's a drain. And I think you said earlier, it's just not sustainable. Like where's it going to go? Like
No.
you know, you can't, like nothing grows from division as opposed to connection and collaboration where obviously growth is possible, right? Like you can't, I don't know what you can build on division. I don't think anything. And I think that, it's been a long time that collectively we've been down this path of division. And my hope, certainly, is that that's starting to shift a little bit. And so it feels important, what you said a minute ago. I think it feels important to contribute collaboration into the space and
Yes.
connection.
Yeah, like the difference between division and disagreement, right? It's
Yeah.
like
Oh my God. Beautiful.
disagreement happens in contact and division is like completely separating. So how do we reconnect with each other, which actually helps us reconnect with ourselves, making the world sort of richer, like you said.
Richer in disagreement, even. Amazing. Doesn't matter. But hanging in with each other and
Yeah.
building a community where all voices truly are given space, right? Like given space to speak. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
That is
in a smaller way, or at least to begin, that's what we're trying to do, I think, as we continue this podcast. And as always, we'd love to hear from people. What do people think about this? Do they think that I'm completely wrong about this divisive thing? And also, if anybody feels like either they want to be a guest because they've got something that they want to add to the conversation, or of somebody that you could sort of nominate that you think would be a great addition to our conversation, hit us up, let us know.
Yeah, we would love to have different voices on. So yes, point them this way.
Yeah, otherwise we'll just talk to each other, which is also amazing. So thank you, Michelle.
You too.